She rescued a lost dog, not knowing its owner was a millionaire actor ready to fall in love. Rebecca Chamberlain never imagined that the shivering golden retriever she found huddled beneath a park bench during Liverpool's worst rainstorm, in decades, would change her life forever. The dog's collar simply read Biscuit, with no phone number or address, just a small theatrical mask charm that jingled when the poor creature moved. As raindrops pounded her umbrella and soaked through her sensible shoes, Rebecca made a split-second decision that would unwittingly set her on a collision course with one of Britain's most elusive bachelors. "Come on then, let's get you somewhere." "Dry," she whispered, wrapping her scarf around the trembling animal. Little did she know that across town, Edward Lockwood, acclaimed actor, theatrical producer, and notoriously private millionaire, was frantically searching for his beloved companion who had bolted during their morning walk when startled by thunder. Rebecca had always been the practical one in her family, the one who calculated risks, who planned meticulously, who rarely stepped outside her comfort zone. Yet here she was, carrying a muddy, soaking wet dog into her sister's immaculate townhouse, leaving puddles on the imported Italian marble her brother-in-law was so proud of. "Rebecca Ann Chamberlain, what on earth?" her sister Caroline exclaimed, nearly dropping the delicate china teacup she had been drying. "He was abandoned in the park," Rebecca explained, already heading for the guest bathroom. "I couldn't just leave him there. And bringing him here seemed like the logical solution." Caroline sighed, though she was already reaching for towels. That was the thing about Caroline, she complained, but she always helped. "Martin will have a fit when he sees what that animal is doing to his floors." Rebecca gently set the dog in the bathtub. "Martin doesn't need to know. I'll clean everything, and tomorrow I'll take him to a vet to check for a microchip." The dog looked up at her with soulful amber eyes that seemed to carry a strange intelligence, almost as if he understood every word. As Rebecca ran warm water and worked shampoo through his matted golden fur, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just any dog. There was something almost theatrical about the way he tilted his head and followed her movements. "And you were quite the performer, aren't you?" she murmured as she wrapped him in a fluffy towel. "I bet you have everyone wrapped around your paw." Biscuit responded with a dignified sniff that made Rebecca laugh out loud, a genuine, unrestrained sound that had become increasingly rare in her carefully structured life. Something about this dog resonated with a part of herself she'd nearly forgotten existed. The Rebecca who once dreamed of spotlights and standing ovations before practicality, and her family's expectations had steered her toward a sensible career in library sciences. Later that evening, as Rebecca sat curled on the sofa with Biscuit nestled against her side, she found herself telling him about the community theatre production she once starred in, how alive she felt on that small stage. Her niece and nephew, initially wary of their unexpected houseguest, now sat enraptured as she regaled them with tales of her brief theatrical past. "Auntie Becca, why did you stop acting?" 8-year-old Olivia asked, absent-mindedly stroking Jane, her pet tortoise, who was watching the proceedings from her terrarium with characteristic slowness. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. "Sometimes we have to make practical choices, sweetie." "But Mum says you were brilliant," Olivia persisted. "She still has the newspaper clipping." Caroline, passing through with a laundry basket, caught Rebecca's eye. She really was. Standing ovation on opening night. Biscuit suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward, as if the mention of performances had triggered something in him. Then, in a move that left them all speechless, he stood up on his hind legs and performed a perfect pirouette before dropping into what could only be described as a theatrical bow. Did that dog just take a bow?" Caroline whispered, laundry forgotten. Rebecca stared at Biscuit, who looked back with what she could swear was a mischievous gleam in his eye. "I think he did. Where did you come from, you remarkable creature? Across town, in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Liverpool, Edward Lockwood stared out at the rain-soaked gardens of his country retreat, a hollowness expanding in his chest as his beloved companion remained missing. Despite his wealth, his awards, and his acclaim, Edward had never felt more alone than he did in this moment, standing in his private amphitheatre where he taught acting workshops to underprivileged youth from neighbouring communities. "We'll find him, Ed," his sister Margaret assured him, squeezing his shoulder. "Biscuit is smart. He'll be okay." Edward nodded, but could not shake the feeling that something significant was shifting in his carefully constructed world. What he didn't know was just how right he was, and that his path was about to intersect with a librarian who had once dreamed of the very stages he now commanded. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's tempest had never happened. Rebecca woke to the unfamiliar weight of Biscuit stretched across the foot of her bed, his golden body rising and falling with each contented breath. For a moment, she allowed herself to enjoy the simple companionship, something that had been notably absent from her life lately. "We should find your owner today," she whispered, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. At the word owner, Biscuit's eyes snapped open and he let out a soft whine. "I know, I'll miss you too, but someone must be looking for you." Rebecca had already called the local shelters the night before, but no one had reported a missing golden retriever with a theatrical charm. Her next stop would be the veterinarian for a microchip scan, followed by putting up some "found dog" and posters around the park. As she moved about her morning routine, she found herself constantly narrating to Biscuit, who followed her from room to room with attentive interest. It was oddly freeing, having someone to talk to who didn't interrupt or judge, just tilted his head with that slightly dramatic flair that made her smile. "I have the day off from the library today," she told him as she poured her coffee. "Lucky timing for you, isn't it? Though I am supposed to go to a book signing later. Famous playwright in town, Gordon Mackenzie. Have you heard of him?" She laughed at herself. "Look at me, asking a dog about playwrights." Biscuit barked once loudly, his tail suddenly wagging with vigor. "I don't tell me you re a theatre critic too," Rebecca joked, but there was something about his reaction that gave her pause. Wait a minute. She kneeled down to examine his collar more closely, finger tracing over the theatrical mask. "Charm. Are you connected to the theatre somehow?" Biscuit barked again, spinning in a circle that made Rebecca laugh despite her growing suspicion that this was no ordinary dog. "Well, let's get you to the vet first, and then we'll solve the mystery of your theatrical background." Durai, the veterinarian's office, was busy that morning, filled with the usual assortment of anxious pets and their equally anxious owners. Rebecca sat in the waiting room, Biscuit sitting regally at her feet, occasionally acknowledging the admiring glances from other patrons with a dignified nod that seemed almost human in its self-awareness. "He's beautifully trained," remarked an elderly woman with a Siamese cat in a carrier. "Show dog." "Oh, he's not mine," Rebecca explained. "I found him yesterday. I am just trying to locate his owner." "Lucky owner," the woman observed. "And lucky you, finding such a well-mannered companion even temporarily." When their turn came, the vet, Dr. Patel, examined Biscuit thoroughly before scanning for a microchip. "And he's in excellent health," she confirmed. "Purebred, probably about 4 years old, and yes, here's a microchip." She checked her computer. "Registered to... Oh." Her eyes widened slightly. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, suddenly apprehensive. Dr. Patel hesitated. "The owner has requested privacy protocols. I'll need to contact them directly rather than sharing the information." Rebecca felt a flicker of disappointment, then reminded herself this was good news. Biscuit would be reunited with his owner. Still, she couldn't help but wonder about the secrecy. "Can you at least tell me if they were local?" So I know he hasn't travelled far. No, yes, fairly local, Dr. Patel allowed. I'll call right away. You're welcome to wait, though it might take some time to arrange the reunion. As they waited, Rebecca checked her watch. The book signing was in 3 hours, and she didn't want to miss it. Gordon Mackenzie had been her favourite playwright since she performed in one of his productions during her brief theatrical career. His latest work was said to be his most personal, inspired by his own experiences of finding love in unexpected places. When Dr. Patel returned, her expression was apologetic. "I've left messages, but haven't reached the owner directly yet. Would you be willing to keep him for another day?" The owner's representative said they could arrange collection tomorrow. "Representative?" Rebecca repeated. "Who has representatives handle their dog matters?" Dr. Patel smiled diplomatically. "I am not at liberty to say more, but they were extremely grateful and would like to compensate you for your care." "That not necessary," Rebecca said quickly. "I am happy to look after him another night." In truth, she was secretly pleased for the extension of their time together. "Will they call me directly?" "They have asked for your number," Dr. Patel confirmed, though given the circumstances, the representative mentioned they might send someone trusted to collect the dog. As they left the clinic, Rebecca couldn't help but feel the mystery deepening. "You belong to someone important, don't you?" she murmured to Biscuit, who trotted beside her with what seemed like a mischievous gleam in his amber eyes. "A celebrity, perhaps? A politician?" Biscuit offered no confirmation, but his tail wagged with particular enthusiasm as they passed a poster advertising Gordon Mackenzie's book signing. "You have good taste in playwrights, at least," Rebecca laughed, then checked her watch again. "Ooh, what do you say we go home? Get you some lunch, and then I'll head to the signing. Caroline can watch you for a couple of hours." Back at the house, Rebecca's nephew and niece were delighted to spend more time with Biscuit, who performed an increasingly impressive array of tricks for their entertainment. Even Caroline seemed charmed, despite her continued concerns about Martin's precious flaws. "Are you sure you don't want to adopt him if the owner doesn't come forward?" Caroline asked, watching as Biscuit gently nudged Jane the tortoise with his nose, earning a glacially slow retraction into her shell. The owner has been located," Rebecca explained, ignoring the strange pang of loss the words provoked. "They could be sending someone tomorrow." Caroline studied her sister's face. "You'd forgotten attached." "Don't it'd be ridiculous. I'd had him for less than 24 hours. "Mm-hmm." Caroline's knowing look spoke volumes. "When does the book signing start? You should get going if you want a good spot in line." As Rebecca prepared to leave, selecting her well-thumbed copy of Mackenzie's first published collection, Biscuit watched her with such intensity that she found herself explaining where she was going, as if he could understand every word. "I'll be back soon," she promised, feeling slightly foolish for the emotion in her voice. "Be good for Caroline." What Rebecca couldn't have known as she left for the bookstore was that across town, Edward Lockwood was finally listening. To his messages, relief flooding through him at the news that Biscuit had been found. And what she certainly couldn't have anticipated was that Edward, who also happened to be Gordon Mackenzie's closest friend and theatrical collaborator, had promised to make an unexpected appearance at today's book signing. The stage was set for a meeting that neither Rebecca nor Edward could possibly be prepared for, a chance encounter orchestrated, some might say, by a particularly clever golden retriever with a theatrical flair. Waterstone's bookshop was packed to capacity, the excited murmur of conversation creating a buzz that reminded Rebecca of opening nights at the theatre. She clutched her copy of Gordon Mackenzie's Stage Whispers like a talisman as she navigated through the crowd, grateful she'd arrived early enough to secure a decent spot in the signing line. Quite the turnout, remarked the woman next to her, a stylish academic type with horn-rimmed glasses. "I heard a rumor that Mackenzie might be bringing a special guest. The store staff have been whispering about it all morning." Rebecca's curiosity piqued. "A special guest? Another author?" "No idea, but whatever it is, they've nearly doubled security." The woman nodded toward the additional staff positioned around the perimeter of the event space. The crowd suddenly hushed as the store manager approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are delighted to welcome acclaimed playwright Gordon Mackenzie, here to discuss and sign copies of his memoir, Behind the Curtain." Polite applause broke out as a distinguished man in his 60s took the stage, his silver hair and lively eyes radiating the same charismatic energy that infused his writing. Gordon Mackenzie smiled warmly at the audience before taking his seat behind the signing table. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Before we start the signing, I'd like to share a bit about the inspiration behind this book. As many of you know, my work has always explored the intersection of art and life, how the stories we tell on stage reflect and sometimes transform our personal narratives." Rebecca listened, enthralled, as Mackenzie spoke of his journey from struggling playwright to celebrated author. There was something almost musical in his cadence, a natural storyteller's gift that had made his plays so compelling. "The greatest performances," he continued, "often happen off stage, in those unexpected moments when life surprises us with connections we never saw coming. Which brings me to a special announcement." The crowd leaned forward collectively, and Rebecca found herself holding her breath. Today, I'm honored to have with me someone who has brought many of my words to life over the years, both as an actor and as the creative force behind several of my most successful productions. Though he rarely makes public appearances, he's graciously agreed to join us briefly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Edward Lockwood. The room erupted in gasps and applause as a tall, elegantly disheveled man stepped onto the stage. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Edward Lockwood was practically a legend, his performances critically acclaimed, his productions consistently groundbreaking, and his personal life intensely private. After a meteoric rise to fame, he had largely retreated from the spotlight, choosing instead to work behind the scenes while maintaining a carefully guarded privacy. And he was, Rebecca had to admit as she stared transfixed, even more charismatic in person than on screen. There was a quiet intensity to him, a thoughtful presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his simple but obviously expensive charcoal sweater, and when he smiled briefly at the audience, his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often in private, if seldom for cameras. "Thank you, Gordon." Edward's voice was rich and warm, carrying easily through the room. "You'll be brief, as today belongs to my friend and his remarkable book. I merely wanted to express my gratitude for the ways Gordon's words have shaped my own journey in theatre and film. There is no greater joy than bringing to life characters who carry truth within them, and no one writes truth quite like Gordon Mackenzie." As Edward spoke, Rebecca felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over her. Something about his gestures, the particular tilt of his head as he listened to Gordon's response. It reminded her of, but no, that was absurd. The signing began, the line moving steadily as each person had their moment with the acclaimed playwright. Rebecca's heart pounded as she approached the table, clutching her book so tightly her knuckles whitened. Edward Lockwood had taken a seat beside Gordon, occasionally engaging with readers when specifically addressed, but mostly observing with quiet interest. When her turn came, Rebecca placed her well-loved copy of Stage Whispers on the table, suddenly tongue-tied in the presence of not one but two men whose work had so profoundly influenced her life's passion. "Hello there," Gordon greeted warmly. "Thank you for coming. Who shall I make this out to?" "Rebecca," she managed. "Rebecca Chamberlain. I performed in your play Whispered Truths years ago, community theatre production. I was Eliza." Gordon's face lit up. "Ah, Eliza. One of my favourite characters. The truth doesn't shout, it whispers to those who listen. And sometimes the heart hears what the ears cannot." Rebecca completed the quote automatically, then blushed at her eagerness. Gordon laughed, delightedly, signing with a flourish. "A true fan. Edward, this young lady played Eliza in Whispered Truths." Edward Lockwood's attention shifted fully to Rebecca, his gaze suddenly sharp with interest. "Did you indeed? That's a challenging role. The emotional range required is considerable." "It was the most rewarding experience of my life," Rebecca admitted, surprised by her own candor. "I've never felt more alive than I did during that production." "Yet you did not pursue acting further?" Edward asked, his head tilting. In that familiar way that continued to nag at Rebecca's memory. "Life had other plans," she replied simply, aware of the line behind her. Edward studied her for a moment longer than necessary, then reached for Gordon's pen. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to Rebecca's book. When Gordon nodded, Edward opened to the title page and added his own signature beneath the author's, along with a brief note. "Thank you both," Rebecca said, accepting the book back with slightly trembling hands. "Your work has meant more to me than I can express." As she turned to leave, Edward called after her. "Miss Chamberlain? A strange question, perhaps, but have you by any chance found a dog recently?" Rebecca froze, turning slowly back toward the table. "A golden retriever? With a theatre mask charm on his collar?" The transformation in Edward's expression was immediate and dramatic, relief, joy, and something like wonder passing across his features in rapid succession. "Biscuit. You found Biscuit." "He's at my sister's house," Rebecca confirmed, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The privacy protocols at the vet's office, the representative who would collect the dog, Biscuit's theatrical mannerisms. "Here's yours." "He escaped during yesterday's storm," Edward explained, seemingly oblivious to the curious onlookers now watching their exchange. "I've been frantic." Gordon Mackenzie observed the interaction with growing amusement. "Ah, so Biscuit has been playing matchmaker again, has he? That dog has a better sense for casting than most directors I know." Edward shot his friend a quelling look before returning his attention to Rebecca. "I can tell you how grateful I am." "Would it be possible?" He hesitated, glancing at the remaining line of fans. "I'm afraid I still have duties here, but perhaps after—" "The signing ends at 5, Gordon interjected helpfully, "and Edward has graciously offered his car and driver for me today. Perhaps they could collect both Miss Chamberlain and Biscuit afterward." Rebecca felt suddenly light-headed at the casual suggestion that Edward Lockwood's private car would be picking her up. That would be fine. I should call my sister and let her know." Edward's smile was transformative, erasing the reserved public persona and revealing something warmer, more genuine. "Wonderful. If you will leave your details with my assistant." He gestured toward a woman who had materialized at the edge of the stage. "We can arrange everything." "And Miss Chamberlain, thank you, truly." As Rebecca moved away from the table in a daze, she opened her book to see what Edward had written beside his signature. The words made her breath catch. "To Rebecca, who brought Eliza to life and rescued. More than just a dog. Some roles find us when we least expect them. Perhaps we should discuss your next act. Edward Lockwood." She looked back to find him watching her, a question in his eyes that had nothing to do with lost pets and everything to do with found opportunities. And in that moment, Rebecca Chamberlain felt the first tremors of a story beginning, one far more unexpected and thrilling than any she had ever performed on stage. The sleek black car that pulled up outside Waterstones at precisely 5:15 p.m. was so discreetly luxurious that it almost escaped notice. Almost, but not quite. Several departing book enthusiasts slowed their pace, curiosity evident as a uniformed driver emerged to open the rear door. Rebecca, who had spent the intervening hours in a nearby cafe, alternating between excited anticipation and nervous doubt, approached with what she hoped was casual composure. The driver spotted her immediately. "Miss Chamberlain?" he inquired with a slight Liverpudlian lilt, softened by formality. "Yes, that's me. Miles Harrington. At your service. Mr. Lockwood sends his apologies. The signing ran longer than anticipated. He's asked me to collect you and then proceed to your sister's residence for Biscuit." Rebecca nodded, suddenly acutely aware of her sensible librarian's outfit. A navy pencil skirt and cream blouse she'd thought perfectly appropriate for a book signing, but now seemed woefully inadequate for an encounter with theatrical royalty. Of course. I should warn you, my sisters. House can be a bit chaotic. She has 2 children and a pet tortoise that has developed an unlikely friendship with your employer's dog. My less professional demeanor cracked slightly with a genuine smile. Biscuit does have a talent for unusual friendships. Mr. Lockwood will be pleased to hear he's been socializing. The interior of the car was a revelation of understated luxury. Supple leather seats, privacy partitions, and a small console offering refreshments. Rebecca perched on the edge of her seat, afraid to fully relax into such opulence. "First time in a Bentley?" Miles asked kindly, watching her through the rearview mirror. "Is it that obvious?" Rebecca laughed, releasing some tension. "I'm more of a public transport person, if I am honest." "Mr. Lockwood was the same before his success," Miles commented, then added with quiet loyalty, "Still is, in many ways. Fame hasn't changed his essential character." Rebecca found this insight into Edward Lockwood surprisingly touching. The man behind the celebrity persona was beginning to intrigue her more than the star himself. When they arrived at Caroline's townhouse, Rebecca was entirely surprised to find her sister had transformed into what could only be described as her receiving important visitors mode. The house was immaculate. Caroline was wearing her best cashmere sweater, and even the children had been mysteriously tidied. What did surprise her was Biscuit's reaction to the car's arrival. The golden retriever, who'd been contentedly sprawled across the living room sofa, suddenly bolted upright, ears forward and tail wagging with such vigor that his entire body shook with excitement. "Biscuit seems to recognize the car," Caroline observed, peering through the front window with poorly disguised curiosity. The dog barked once, imperiously, as if to say, "Of course I do," then bounded to the door, sitting at attention like a soldier awaiting inspection. When Miles rang the doorbell, Caroline smoothed her hair one final time before opening the door with a welcoming smile that faltered slightly when she found only the driver standing there. "Good evening, madam. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Lockwood to collect Miss Chamberlain and Biscuit." Biscuit, apparently unwilling to wait for formal introductions, squeezed past Caroline's legs and performed what could only be described as a choreographed dance of joy around Miles, who bent to ruffle the dog's ears with familiar affection. "And hello, troublemaker," he greeted the dog. "You've caused quite a stir, you know." Biscuit had the grace to look momentarily abashed before resuming his exuberant celebration. Rebecca, watching this reunion, felt a complicated mix of emotions. Happiness, for Biscuit certainly, but also a wistful sense of impending loss. In just over 24 hours, this theatrical canine had somehow burrowed into her heart. "I suppose this is goodbye then," she said softly, kneeling to stroke Biscuit's silky head one last time. Miles cleared his throat. Actually, Miss Chamberlain, Mr. Lockwood was hoping you might accompany Biscuit home. He'd like to thank you personally, if that's convenient." Caroline's eyebrows shot up so fast Rebecca thought they might achieve orbit. "Ah, how thoughtful," her sister interjected before Rebecca could respond. "She'd be delighted, wouldn't you, Becca?" Rebecca hesitated, caught between curiosity and caution. "I am not really dressed for—" "Nonsense, Caroline." Dismissed, already retrieving Rebecca's coat from the hall closet. "You look lovely. Besides, it's just returning a dog, not attending a film premiere." My less carefully neutral expression suggested this might not be entirely accurate, but he said nothing to contradict Caroline's assessment. 15 minutes later, having endured her sister's rapid-fire advice, stand up straight, ask intelligent questions, and for heaven's sake, get his autograph for the children, Rebecca found herself back in the Bentley with Biscuit sprawled contentedly across her lap, seemingly unconcerned about shedding golden fur all over her navy skirt. As they left the city behind, the urban landscape gradually giving way to more pastoral settings, Rebecca's curiosity finally overcame her reticence. "Where exactly are we going, Miles?" "Lockwood Hall," he replied. "Mr. Lockwood's country estate. It's about 20 minutes outside Liverpool, a bit off the beaten path, which suits his preference for privacy." Rebecca gazed out the window as they turned onto a narrow lane bordered by ancient oak trees. It must be strange living with that level of fame, needing security protocols just to find your lost dog. Miles considered this. Mr. Lockwood handles it better than most. He's created a sanctuary at the hall, a place where he can simply be Edward rather than Edward Lockwood. He glanced in the rearview mirror. You'll see. What Rebecca saw first, as they crested a gentle hill, was a golden sunset illuminating what could only be described as a storybook setting. Lockwood Hall wasn't the imposing mansion she half expected, but rather a rambling stone house with ivy-covered walls surrounded by gardens that managed to be both meticulously maintained and charmingly wild. Beyond the main house, she glimpsed what appeared to be a small amphitheatre nestled among the trees, and beyond that, pastoral fields where animals grazed. "It's beautiful," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her nervousness. "Mr. Lockwood thinks so," Miles agreed, slowing as they approached a pair of wrought-iron gates that swung open silently at their approach. "He's particularly proud of the orchards and the theatre. He built the latter for community workshops. Local children come twice weekly for acting lessons." Now, this information didn't align with the reclusive celebrity image Edward Lockwood cultivated in the media, and Rebecca found herself revising her preconceptions as they wound up the gravel drive toward the house. Biscuit, who had been dozing, suddenly perked up as they approached, nose pressed eagerly against the window. When the car came to a stop before the main entrance, he scrambled onto Rebecca's lap, tail thrumming against her arm in rhythmic excitement. "Someone's happy to be home," she laughed, attempting to control the whirlwind of golden fur. The front ducker opened, and Edward Lockwood emerged, dressed casually in jeans and a simple linen shirt that somehow looked more expensive than Rebecca's entire wardrobe. Gone was the public persona from the bookstore. This Edward moved with relaxed ease, his face lighting with unguarded joy at the sight of the car. Before Miles could complete his chauffeur's duties, Biscuit had shouldered his way through the door Rebecca had barely managed to open, launching himself across the gravel with a jubilant bark. Edward knelt to receive the canine missile, laughing, as Biscuit nearly bowled him over in greeting. "Yes, I missed you too, you ridiculous creature," he murmured, his voice carrying in the evening stillness. "What were you thinking, running off like that?" Rebecca emerged from the car more sedately, suddenly acutely aware that she was about to enter the private domain of a man whose films and productions she had admired from afar for years. The Edward Lockwood, now roughhousing with his dog on. The gravel seemed simultaneously more approachable and more intimidating than his public image. More human, certainly, but also more real. When he finally looked up, still restraining an exuberant Biscuit, his smile was so genuine it momentarily took her breath away. "Miss Chamberlain, Rebecca, thank you for coming all this way." "It was no trouble," she replied automatically, then smiled at the absurdity of the statement, as if being chauffeured in a Bentley to a country estate could ever be considered trouble. Edward rose gracefully, Biscuit finally settling into a semblance of decorum at his side. "I hope Miles explained that I wanted to thank you personally. What you did, taking in a strange dog during a storm, caring for him, trying to find his owner, it was extraordinarily kind." Anyone would have done the same," Rebecca demurred. "I very much doubt that," Edward countered, studying her with that same intense interest he'd shown at the bookstore. "Most people would have called animal control and continued with, 'The day you brought him home, bathed him, fed him?'" He paused. "Miles tells me he even made friends with a tortoise." Rebecca laughed, relaxing slightly. "My niece's pet, Jane. They had a bit of a standoff at first, but eventually reached an understanding." Edward's eyes crinkled with amusement. Biscuit has always been a diplomat. It served him well on film sets. He gestured toward the house. "Please come inside. I've asked Mrs. Winters to prepare tea, though if you prefer something stronger after your journey, that can certainly be arranged." As they walked toward the entrance, Rebecca became aware of soft, bleating sounds coming from the fields beyond the house. "Are those goats?" Edward nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Heritage breeds, primarily. A bit of a passion project. I also keep special heritage pigs, helping preserve bloodlines that are becoming increasingly rare." "You're a farmer as well as an actor and producer?" Rebecca asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. I grew up in the country," Edward explained, as they entered a foyer that managed to be simultaneously grand and welcoming. "My father was a veterinarian in a small village, not unlike this one. The theatrical life came later, but I never lost my connection to this kind of setting." He led her through to a comfortable sitting room with worn leather sofas and bookshelves that reached to the ceiling. "My sister says it keeps me grounded, reminds me there's a world beyond scripts and studios." "Your sister lives here too?" Rebecca asked, accepting his gesture to take a seat. "Margaret lives in the East Wing with her son, Oliver. She manages the estate when I am filming and oversees the educational programs we run in the amphitheater." He settled across from her, Biscuit immediately claiming a spot at his feet. "And I believe in making arts education accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford expensive drama schools." Rebecca found herself increasingly intrigued by this man who seemed to inhabit two worlds simultaneously: the glamorous realm of film and theatre, and this bucolic countryside existence, complete with rare livestock and community outreach. "That explains Biscuit's theatrical talents," she observed. "Oh, he performed quite the routine for my niece and nephew. I've never seen a dog take a bow before." Edward laughed, the sound warm and unexpectedly musical. "He's spent his life on sets and in theatres. Sometimes I think he believes he's the talent and I am merely his assistant." He regarded his dog with fond exasperation. "I should have known he'd find his way to someone with theatrical background. Gordon mentioned you performed in one of his plays." "Just community theatre," Rebecca clarified quickly. "Years ago. I work at the Liverpool Central Library now." "Just community theatre," Edward repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Some of the most honest, powerful performances I've ever seen have been in church halls and community centres. People performing for the pure love of it, without ego or career ambition clouding the work. Before Rebecca could respond, a silver-haired woman appeared with a tea tray. "Ah, thank you, Mrs. Winters. This is Rebecca Chamberlain, Biscuit's rescuer. Rebecca, this is Mrs. Winters, who keeps both the house and me in some semblance of order." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Chamberlain," Mrs. Winters said with a warm smile. "Any friend of Biscuit's is welcome here. He's quite the judge of character." As Mrs. Winters poured tea with practiced elegance, Rebecca noticed a pair of rabbits hopping freely across a corner of the room, exploring with apparent familiarity. Edward followed her gaze. "Donald and Daisy," he explained. "Another of my sister's rescue projects. They refused to stay in their hutch, so eventually we surrendered and gave them the run of the house." Your home is full of surprises," Rebecca observed, accepting a delicate teacup. "It's not what I expected." "From the reclusive, brooding celebrity?" Edward's tone was light, but Rebecca detected a hint of genuine curiosity beneath the joke. "From anyone, really," she admitted. "The animals, the amphitheater, the community programs, it's like finding a hidden world." "That's precisely what it is," Edward replied, his expression turning thoughtful. "When your life becomes public property, your work analyzed, your personal life speculated about, you need somewhere that's entirely your own." He glanced around the room, his affection for the space evident. "This is my reality. The rest is just performance." The conversation flowed with unexpected ease as they drank their tea. Edward asked insightful questions about her work at the library, genuinely interested in her programs promoting literacy and her special focus on introducing children to theatre through literature. In turn, he shared stories from his productions that revealed his passion for storytelling rather than fame. "I should probably be getting back," Rebecca said reluctantly as she noticed the deepening dusk outside the windows. "My sister will be wondering." "Of course," Edward agreed, though she thought she detected a similar reluctance in his voice. "Miles can drive you. But before you go, would you mind terribly taking a short walk? There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity piqued, Rebecca agreed, and soon they were strolling through the gardens with Biscuit trotting ahead, occasionally looking back, as if to ensure they were following correctly. "This is my favorite part of the property," Edward said as they approached the small amphitheater she had glimpsed from the car. In the gathering twilight, soft landscape lighting illuminated the space, a perfect miniature of a classical Greek theatre, with stone seating arranged in a semicircle around a simple wooden stage. "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, imagining children discovering theatre in this magical setting. "We do Shakespeare for the younger groups in summer," Edward explained, leading her down toward the stage. "Romeo and Juliet is always popular, though I personally advocate for A Midsummer Night's Dream, more fairies, fewer suicide pacts." Rebecca laughed, stepping onto the stage and instinctively feeling the change in acoustics. The way her voice would carry from this spot to the furthest seat, it was perfectly designed. "Would you?" Edward hesitated, then continued with a shade of that earlier intensity. "Would you perform something? Just a line or two. I'd like to hear your Eliza. Gordon was genuinely impressed that you remembered her lines after all this time." Rebecca felt a flutter of panic, then an unexpected surge of something else. The old excitement, the thrill of stepping into a character's skin. "I haven't performed in years," she warned. "The stage doesn't forget those who truly belong on it," Edward said simply. Heart pounding, Rebecca moved to center stage, taking a moment to recall Eliza's pivotal monologue. Then, drawing a deep breath, she began. "The truth doesn't shout, it whispers to those who listen, and sometimes the heart hears what the ears cannot." Her voice filled the space, stronger than she had expected, finding its home in the cool evening. No, we spend our lives searching for grand revelations, when all along the answers are murmuring beside us, waiting only for us to still ourselves enough to hear. As the final words faded into the twilight, Rebecca became aware of Edward, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, wonder perhaps, or recognition of something shared. "You never should have left the stage," he said quietly. "Life doesn't always follow the script we write for it," she replied, suddenly feeling exposed. Edward approached, joining her on the stage. "What if you could come back? Not immediately, perhaps, but gradually. We're starting a new community program, workshops for adults who abandoned their artistic passions, teaching at first, but potentially performing as well." He smiled, a touch self-deprecating. "I had planned to lead it myself when filming. Schedules allowed, but I find myself thinking you might be perfect." Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to teach acting? Based on a few lines from a play I performed years ago?" "Based on how you performed those lines just now," Edward corrected, "and how you connected with Biscuit, which may seem unrelated, but actually reveals a great deal about emotional intelligence and instinctive understanding of others. Those are qualities you can teach. They were either present or they were not." As if summoned by his name, Biscuit appeared at the edge of the stage, watching their exchange with evident interest. "I have a full-time job," Rebecca protested, weakly, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. "The workshops would be weekends only," Edward countered, "and the library might consider it professional development, arts integration and all that." Rebecca felt herself wavering, the prospect simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Edward reached into his pocket, retrieving a business card. "My personal number," he explained, handing it to her, "not the one my agent gives out." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a momentary contact that nevertheless sent a surprising current up Rebecca's arm. From Edward's slight intake of breath, she wondered if he had felt it too. On the drive back to Liverpool, Rebecca sat quietly, the business card a tangible weight in her pocket. Biscuit had seemed genuinely disappointed to see her leave, pressing, his nose against the window as the car pulled away. More surprising was how disappointed she had felt to leave them both. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine that felt increasingly constraining. Rebecca moved through her duties at the library with her usual efficiency, but her thoughts continually drifted to Lockwood Hall, to the amphitheatre bathed, in twilight, to Edward's unexpected offer, and to a certain golden retriever who had crashed into her carefully ordered life. The business card remained unused in her purse, not because she hadn't thought about calling, but because she had thought about it far too much. Each time her fingers reached for her phone, a wave of practical objections surfaced. It was impulsive. She barely knew him. Celebrities lived in different worlds. It could never work. Yet beneath these sensible concerns pulsed something more honest. Fear. Not of Edward himself, but of the dormant part of herself he had recognized and called forth. "You were going to wear a hole in the carpet," Caroline observed one evening as Rebecca paced the living room, unaware she had been doing so for nearly 10 minutes. "Sorry," Rebecca mumbled, forcing herself to sit, "just thinking about work." "No, you were not," Caroline countered, setting aside her tablet. "You were thinking about the handsome movie star and his offer to bring you back to theatre. The real question is why you haven't called him yet." Rebecca sighed. Her sister's perceptiveness could be inconvenient. "It's complicated." "It's really not," Caroline insisted. "You love theatre. You were brilliant at it. He's offering you a chance to reconnect with something that made you happy. What's complicated about that?" "The fact that he's Edward Lockwood, that I am a librarian, who hasn't performed in years, that this whole thing probably started as a gesture of gratitude for finding his dog and nothing more." Caroline studied her sister with unexpected gentleness. "Becca, when did you become so afraid of taking chances?" The question struck with uncomfortable precision. When indeed? Perhaps when their parents' arts-focused lifestyle had led to financial instability. Teaching Rebecca early that practical choices were safer, perhaps during university when she set aside drama for library science, telling herself it was temporary until it wasn't tea, or perhaps gradually, one small concession at a time, until caution had become her default. "I am not afraid," she protested, unconvincingly even to her own ears. "I am realistic." "The realistic thing," Caroline said, rising to leave the room, "would be to acknowledge that you've been happier thinking about this opportunity than you've been about anything in years. But what do I know? I'm just the practical sister who married an accountant." At the doorway, she paused. "By the way, a package came for you today. I left it on the hall table." Curious, Rebecca found a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. No return address, but her name was written in an elegant hand she didn't recognize. Inside, she found a first edition of Gordon Mackenzie's rarest play, Whispered Truths. The very one she had performed in years ago. A note slipped from between its pages. "The right role finds the right actor, even when years have passed. The workshop begins next Saturday at 10 a.m. No pressure, but Biscuit has already added you to the attendance sheet." And Rebecca's laugh was genuine, the first uninhibited one, in longer than she cared to admit. The gesture was thoughtful, personal, revealing an attention to detail that touched her deeply. Before she could overthink it, she reached for her phone and the business card, typing a simple message: "Tell Biscuit not to give my role away. Would be there. RC." The response came almost immediately. "He's doing his happy dance. I might be too. EL." Rebecca smiled at the image, then impulsively added, "Ivy missed him. The dog, that is." After a brief pause, "We both missed you, not just the dog." Something warm unfurled in Rebecca's chest as she stared at these simple words. It felt dangerously like hope. Saturday dawned clear and bright, autumn sunshine gilding the countryside as Miles, who had insisted on collecting her despite her protests that she could drive herself, turned the car onto the now familiar lane, leading to Lockwood Hall. This time, however, they continued past the main house toward the amphitheater, where Rebecca was surprised to see a small group already gathered, about a dozen people of varying ages, chatting with the nervous excitement of those embarking on something new. And in their midst, unmistakable even from a distance, was Edward, gesturing animatedly as he explained something to the group. Biscuit lay nearby, apparently supervising the proceedings with canine authority. As Rebecca approached, Biscuit spotted her first, bounding over with unrestrained joy. His enthusiastic greeting drew all eyes in her direction, including Edward's. The smile that transformed his features sent a ripple of whispers through the assembled group. "Everyone," Edward announced as she reached them, "this is Rebecca Chamberlain, an extraordinarily talented performer who has graciously agreed to co-lead our workshop series." The warmth in his voice made the introduction feel like far more than professional courtesy. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions and exercises, simple theatre games designed to help the participants reconnect with their creativity and overcome self-consciousness. Rebecca found herself falling naturally into a teaching rhythm that complemented Edward's approach, her practical library experience balancing his more intuitive theatrical techniques. What surprised her most was how seamlessly they worked together, anticipating each other's thoughts and building on ideas as if they had been teaching partners for years rather than hours. Several times she caught Edward watching her with that same expression of wondering recognition she had seen in the amphitheater, as if he were continually discovering something both new and familiar in her. During a lunch break, as the participants Scattered to enjoy picnic baskets Mrs. Winters had prepared, Edward led Rebecca toward a shaded bench overlooking the property. "You're a natural teacher," he observed, handing her a sandwich. "The way you helped Martin overcome his hesitation in the mirroring exercise was brilliantly done." Rebecca accepted the compliment with a smile. "It's not so different from helping shy children find books they connect with. People want to express themselves. Sometimes they just need permission." "Exactly," Edward agreed, his enthusiasm palpable. "That's precisely the philosophy behind these workshops, giving people permission to reclaim parts of themselves they've set aside." As they ate, Rebecca found herself sharing more of her journey, how she had loved performing, but chosen a more stable path after watching her artistic parents struggle. Financially, how the library had become both refuge and purpose, how she occasionally still auditioned monologues in empty rooms when no one was listening. In turn, Edward spoke of his own path, the village veterinarian's son who had stumbled into acting through a school play, the unexpected success that had felt simultaneously validating and disorienting, the retreat to Lockwood Hall as a way to maintain connection with his authentic self. "Fame distorts everything," he admitted, breaking a piece of his sandwich crust to share with an opportunistic biscuit. "And people see the persona, not the person. That's why this place is so important to me. And these workshops, here I am just Edward teaching acting, not Edward Lockwood, celebrity." Rebecca studied him thoughtfully. "Is that why you read so private? To protect this reality?" "Partly," he acknowledged, "though ironically the more private I am, the more the public narrative spins its own tales. According to the tabloids, I'm either a reclusive eccentric or a secret playboy, with a different model each weekend." He laughed, but Rebecca detected a hint of genuine frustration beneath the humor. "For what it's worth," she offered, "I like the real version much better than either tabloid alternative." Their eyes met, and something shifted subtly in the air between them, a recognition of mutual understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might say something more, but the workshop participants were beginning to return, and the moment passed. The afternoon session focused on monologue work, with Edward demonstrating approaches to text analysis. Rebecca watched, captivated all over again by his natural gift, the way he could transform himself with the smallest gesture or vocal shift, embodying character with effortless precision. As the workshop concluded and participants began to depart, exchanging contact information and excited commentary about the next session, Edward approached Rebecca with an unexpected hesitancy. "I was hoping you might stay for dinner," he said, the invitation carefully casual. "Margaret's been asking to meet the woman who rescued Biscuit, and I thought perhaps we could discuss plans for next week's workshop." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Margaret Lockwood proved to be a practical, warm-hearted woman with her brother's expressive eyes and none of his reserve. Her 10-year-old son, Oliver, was a precocious, theater-obsessed boy who immediately bombarded Rebecca with questions about her performance as Eliza and declared, with the absolute certainty of childhood, that she should play the lead in their upcoming production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. "Oliver," Margaret chided gently, "Ms. Chamberlain has a job in Liverpool. She can to simply drop everything to perform in our modest production." "Actually," Edward interjected, exchanging a glance with Rebecca, "I've been meaning to discuss something with you both." He outlined a more ambitious vision for the community theatre program. Weekend workshops expanding into a full production, potentially partnering with the Liverpool library system for an educational component. "We need someone to coordinate between the two," he concluded, his casual tone belied by the intensity of his gaze as it rested on Rebecca. "Someone who understands both worlds." Rebecca recognized the offer woven into the suggestion, a bridge between her current life and the theatrical passion she had set aside, a chance to integrate rather than choose between them. "It would be a significant commitment," she said. "Carefully. I'd need to discuss it with the library director." "Of course," Edward agreed. "No pressure, just possibility." As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn into the Lockwood family dynamic. Margaret's dry wit, Oliver's enthusiasm, and Edward's quiet centre creating a comfortable harmony that felt unexpectedly welcoming. Even the house itself seemed to embrace her, the initial intimidation of its grandeur giving way to appreciation for its lived-in warmth. When the time came for Miles to drive her back to Liverpool, Rebecca found herself reluctant to leave. At the door, Edward hesitated, then asked with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "Would you consider having dinner with me in Liverpool next week? Not to discuss the workshop. Just dinner." The clarification hung between them, its significance unmistakable. This wasn't a professional invitation, it was unambiguously personal. Rebecca felt a moment of the old hesitation, the practical voice urging caution, reminding her of the differences in their worlds. But something had shifted during this day of creative connection and honest conversation. The gap between their lives seemed less significant than the unexpected alignment of their values and aspirations. "I'd like that," she said simply. Edward's smile held relief and something more complex, a quiet joy tinged with wonder, as if he too was surprised by the connection forming between them. "Biscuit will be devastated to be left behind," he joked, lightening the moment. "Tell him I'll visit again soon," Rebecca promised, the commitment extending beyond the dog to encompass all that Lockwood Hall had come to represent: possibility, authenticity, and the courage to reclaim neglected parts of herself. As Miles drove her back through the darkening countryside, Rebecca realized with startling clarity that the familiar streets of Liverpool no longer felt quite like home. Something essential had shifted, or perhaps had been rediscovered in the amphitheatre, in the easy conversation, in the moment Edward's eyes had met hers over shared stories and broken bread. For the first time in years, she felt fully present in her own life, no longer watching from the wings, but stepping into the spotlight of her own potential. And as the lights of the city appeared on the horizon, Rebecca Chamberlain found herself contemplating a script revision more dramatic than any she had ever performed, one in which the practical librarian reconnected with her artistic soul and, perhaps, just perhaps, found an unexpected co-star in the process. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Liverpool Central Library's main reading room had been transformed. Book stacks had been temporarily relocated to create a performance space, and chairs arranged in neat rows were rapidly filling with expectant audience members. Programs passed from hand to hand, emblazoned with the title Breaking Character, a theatrical journey through literature, and the logos of both the library and the Lockwood Foundation for Arts Education. Behind a makeshift curtain fashioned from deep blue velvet, Rebecca adjusted the collar of her costume, the ethereal gown of Titania, Queen of the Fairies, and fought against the familiar flutter of pre-performance nerves. Around her, the workshop. Participants turned actors made final preparations, their transformation from hesitant beginners to confident performers one of the most rewarding aspects of the past months. The project had expanded beyond anyone's initial vision. What began as weekend workshops had evolved into a full theatrical program, bridging the library's literacy mission with Lockwood Hall's arts education initiative. Tonight's performance represented the culmination of their work, selected scenes from literature brought to theatrical life, connecting classic texts to contemporary audiences through performance. 5 minutes, everyone, called Margaret, who had taken on the role of stage manager with characteristic efficiency. "Rebecca, Edward wants a word before curtain." Rebecca found him in a quiet corner, resplendent in his Oberon costume, the king of the fairies reimagined with subtle contemporary touches that made the character both mythical and accessible. These past months had revealed Edward's genius for such details, his instinct for honoring traditional texts while making them relevant to modern audiences. But it was the man beneath the costume who had become increasingly important to Rebecca. The Edward who debated literature over tea in her small apartment, who brought Biscuit to visit Jane the tortoise with ritual regularity, who listened to her ideas with genuine interest and challenged her to expand her vision of what was possible. "Nervous?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Terrified," she admitted, "but in the best possible way." Edward smiled, the expression now as familiar to her as her own reflection. "I have something for you." He reached into a hidden pocket in his elaborate costume and withdrew a small velvet box. "Her opening night tradition," he explained, though perhaps a bit more significant than usual. With suddenly trembling fingers, Rebecca opened the box to find a delicate silver charm in the shape of a theatrical mask, identical to the one on Biscuit's collar, but fashioned into a pendant hanging from a slender chain. "Edward," she breathed, recognizing the gesture for what it was, not just a gift, but a symbol of connection. "I had it made after that first day in the amphitheater," he confessed, his usual eloquence momentarily deserting him. "I knew then, though it seemed impossible, too soon, too improbable, but these months working together, building something neither of us could have created alone." He took a steadying breath. "What I am trying to say, rather badly, is that I love you, Rebecca Chamberlain. Not just your talent or your intelligence, though both are remarkable, but the essence of who you are, the woman who rescues lost dogs in rainstorms and never abandons a passion, merely sets it aside until the right moment." Rebecca stared at him, heart pounding like a timpani in her chest. Their relationship had evolved gradually, professional respect blossoming into friendship, then deepening into something neither had rushed to label. There had been quiet dinners in out-of-the-way restaurants, long walks with Biscuit in countryside lanes, evenings spent reading scripts aloud by firelight, each moment building toward this one, though she hadn't dared to fully anticipate it. "I love you too," she said, the words emerging with surprising steadiness despite her racing pulse. "The real you, not the celebrity or the recluse or any other version the world has constructed. Just Edward, with his animals and his amphitheater and his absurdly intelligent dog." At the mention of his name, Biscuit appeared as if summoned, his golden head poking through the curtain. He wore a specially crafted collar of flowers for his role as Puck's canine companion in the night's performance, and his expression held such smug satisfaction that Rebecca couldn't help but laugh. "I believe he's telling us it's time to places," Edward observed, carefully fastening the mask pendant around Rebecca's neck. "We can continue this conversation after the show." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, touching the silver charm with wondering fingers. "We certainly will." As they took their positions for the opening scene, Rebecca caught sight of Caroline and her family in the front row, Oliver vibrating with excitement beside them, and Mrs. Winters dabbing discreetly at her eyes in the back. Even Donald and Daisy had apparently made the journey, confined to a special viewing box Margaret had constructed. The house lights dimmed, and Rebecca felt the familiar electric hush descend, that magical moment when potential hung suspended in darkness, waiting to be transformed into reality through the alchemy of performance. The spotlight caught Edward first, his Oberon commanding and mysterious as he began the immortal opening lines. Then it widened to include Rebecca's Titania, the two of them locked in the exquisite tension of characters at odds yet inextricably bound. As she stepped forward to deliver her first lines, Rebecca felt the weight of the mask pendant against her skin. a tangible reminder of the extraordinary journey that had begun with a lost dog in a rainstorm and led to this moment of integrated purpose. The librarian and the actress, the practical and the passionate, no longer divided but harmonized into a more complete self. And in the front row, watching with unabashed pride, sat Biscuit, the inadvertent matchmaker who had escaped during a thunderstorm and found precisely the person his owner needed most. As Rebecca's eyes briefly met Edward's between their scripted lines, the unspoken understanding passed between them. Sometimes the heart indeed hears what the ears cannot, and sometimes the most profound truths are not proclaimed but whispered in amphitheaters at twilight, in quiet moments of connection, and in the extraordinary ordinary moments that compose a life shared. The lights brightened to full illumination, the audience faded from awareness, and Rebecca Chamberlain stepped fully into the spotlight of her reclaimed passion, no longer a character in someone else's story, but the author of her own, happily, ever after, with unexpected co-stars and countless unwritten chapters still waiting to unfold.